Hello and welcome back to the Student Hub Live. Well, we've been having a whale of a time in the chat with you at home, and we aim to please, and Bruce has had a request that we show you the studio. So Bruce, we thought no problem at all, let's let you have a tour of our very small studio here in Walton Hall in Milton Keynes at the Open University. So this is what everything looks like. There we are. And you can see that HJ isn't on his own. There are some people helping him, but he's doing a sterling job with everything on the chat, managing to keep all your comments coming through to us in the studio. Yeah, all right, leave him alone now. There we go. And it is great chatting with everyone. There have been so many tips, so many ideas shared. Please keep them coming, in particular for our next session. So in this session, we're looking at returning to study. And as part of that, we're looking at how this might be experienced for new students and also how it might be experienced for access students. So those are students who are just starting at the Open University at level 0, doing an access module with us. And I'm joined by Anactoria and Carlton Woods, Anactoria Clarke even, I should say your surname as well, in case people want to email you. Now, I wanted to sort of pick up on this idea about how people might be returning to study, because for a lot of Open University students, all of a sudden they're getting very excited about their module, or they might even be returning to study after the break in the summer. So they might be thinking about that. And there's often a mixture of excitement, nervousness, etc., about what's to come. Some of the expected, some of the unexpected. But can we talk about people who might be studying for the very first time with the Open University and what that sort of experience might look like? How do students tend to come to us?
I think they tend to come to us because they have perhaps always wanted to do further study but didn't have the opportunity at the time when they might have normally gone on from school, or just weren't ready, just didn't have the belief in themselves. So quite often we've got a lot of students thinking, I don't know if this is for me, I don't know if I can do it. And also they don't know if they can fit it in often. It might be the first time they're trying to fit in something other than family and work. So yeah, they're often quite nervous but excited.
Have you heard of this idea of imposter syndrome, where you think everyone's going to find out that I can't do this? I often feel like that with a lot of things. And I've heard some students say that as well. This idea about thinking you can do things and sort of getting on with it, how important is that in terms of doing things?
Yeah, I think it's really important to just be open to, you're going to find stuff out about yourself and about study. You're going to find out what doesn't work. And that, to be honest, is almost as important. In fact, I think it's more important than finding out what does work. And access is great because it's where you can make mistakes. It's where you can kind of try things out and think, oh, that wasn't that successful, because you're doing it in a really supported way.
So Carlton, tell us about, in your sort of role overseeing students and the sort of staff tutor side of things that you've been involved with in the past, what sort of issues do students come with? I mean, I've heard, for example, that some students are thinking, oh, I don't really have this sort of skill or that sort of skill. And yet we know that a lot of these courses, Access or Level 1, are structured to introduce students to these sorts of skills. But what things are common in terms of anxieties that students might present when they're starting to study?
Well, there's probably about 3 or 4 main ones. So one is whether students think they've got the time to actually sort of participate in the module. Another one is around whether they've actually got the academic ability to do it. And a typical one, a typical concern is around maths type skills, particularly in the sort of science, technology, engineering, maths subjects. People are really concerned about whether they've got sufficient math skills to allow them to proceed.
Yeah, and of course this is the issue with open access, because anybody can come to the Open University, and yet we also, because we're open access, have a range of materials out there that anyone can get to grips with, and sometimes the summer's a good time to start brushing up on some of those skills. Would you say that's a good idea, in particular if people were anxious about the maths?
I think it's... Yes and no, because it depends on the sort of individual sort of type of student that you are. Because some people are quite happy to go off and explore for themselves. If people have got the sort of time and the inclination to do that and they're not going to get too worried, by all means do so. If they're the kind of person that might get a little bit worried, then it might be better just sort of to wait until you had a chance to talk to your tutor, and they can point you in the right direction. And that way, that might be a little less scary going down that route.
But these are big concepts. I mean, sometimes if you say, I think I might struggle with maths, that can be a big thing for people. And yet they might have the basic arithmetic skills. They might sort of be more worried about the logic. They might not know what the maths is that they have to grapple with, the writing skills, the referencing skills. Sometimes when you're starting to study, you sort of learn what you're missing, but also you might have anxieties that maybe aren't so warranted. It might be that, you know, just by going into Tesco's and doing your weekly shopping, you've actually got quite a lot of numeracy skills that you hadn't maybe given yourself credit for.
Well, myself and Anactoria have been doing a little piece of research looking at how students progress on the Access module, and there was a lovely piece of feedback from one of the students where they said that after sort of engaging with the materials, they felt able to help their son with their maths homework for the first time ever.
Wow.
And it was a confidence factor. They had not felt confident enough beforehand to be able to do so, but after engaging with the materials, they were able to engage, and that was a really nice piece of feedback.
Yeah. So part of this, I guess, I mean, Simon's just been talking about learning journals and being mindful of the way that we learn things. Part of this, I guess, is this whole exploration and thinking, what am I doing? What can I do? But also knowing that the OU have this whole host of ways of helping students if things get, you know, sticky. So like you say, Carlton, they could maybe start doing something in advance, or it might be that they just go with it, and then all of a sudden, once they recognise that they might need a bit of help on X, Y or Z, they can then go off and do that. What tends to be the best way for students to sort of, I guess, identify some of those areas when they might need help?
Well, I mean, quite often they'll be identified through doing the assessments. So particularly on Access, their tutors will play a really vital role in giving them feedback and identifying any areas that might need a bit of extra work or support and pointing them in the right direction. So even if students are worried about submitting something, you know, they should do, because that's an opportunity to find out, you know, what are you strong at actually, you know, where are the gaps and what can you do to plug them, but actually what's working really well for you, and to get, you know, that help and support.
And certainly from a tutor perspective as well, one of the things that a tutor will be looking to do early on is to sort of initiate that discussion with students around the areas that they think they may feel most concerned about, and trying to sort of explore that and trying to work out whether that's a sort of real concern or whether it's a concern around confidence. Because sometimes people are able to do things, they're just not very confident that they can.
They just need to find a way into it that, you know, hasn't been explained to them before. So sometimes the tutor can just offer a different way in.
And this confidence is such a key thing. It's often, I think, what makes students stay with the OU as opposed to leave, because often, like you say, there are just different ways of teaching. Sometimes when you're really stressed out and you're on a time pressure and you've got a deadline, you can't get a concept. But maybe later you can go and watch something else or have it explained in a different way, and then all of a sudden it makes sense.
And that's the advantage of the Access model of tuition, if you like, because it's a one-to-one contact, so it's offered through the medium of telephone, and you feel so, from a tutor perspective, you feel so you really get to know students very, very well. You never actually see them face to face, but you actually know them really well by the end of the module. And some students require a lot of help, and that's fine. Some students require less help and are far more independent. But that's the thing about Access. It just brings everyone up to a sort of a similar kind of standard by the end of the module.
Yeah. Siobhan says she's finding the session so useful and she's going to watch it on Catch Up later. I'm pleased you're finding it useful, Siobhan, and do put any comments in the chat as well that you'd like us to clarify. So let's talk about Access then. This whole idea, which is level 0, you know, a 30-week module that we've got 3 options that students can do. Now, I've heard a lot of students who are studying with the OU, and, you know, we've got 68% of students who are not returning after a break. So only 32, just under a third of students are returning after a break. So we've got quite a lot of continuing students here in the chat right now. But I know a lot of students will say, oh, my mum said, you know, she'd like to do something, but she doesn't have the confidence. And Access can be a great way for people to try an OU course, and I know a lot of students recommend it to their friends, because how often do you find OU students who know other OU students, etc. But it might be an option that some people haven't considered, and so I'm wondering, for our continuing students, when their friends are saying, I don't know what you're doing, and they're saying, well, you should go and study with the OU, tell us about the Access so that they can maybe fill those people in on why they're a nice place to start.
It's a much more relaxed pace than your traditional level 1 module, so you require fewer hours in the week. It's a nice place to start if you're not sure how you're going to fit it in, for example. So if you've got lots of other commitments or lots of other stuff that you want to do and you're not quite sure at the moment where those hours are going to come from, it's much better off to start with Access, because, you know, you can try and get a bit of a study pattern going. You also have, as Carlton said, the one-to-one tutor support with tutors such as Carlton, who are lovely. So you have a really nice person who's going to be contacting you, and they're going to be helping you with your studies, and you can get help on the things that are pertinent just to you.
The other element around it as well, a lot of the all the access modules are quite wide-ranging as well. Mm-hmm. So students get the sort of chance to dip their toe in different aspects of a subject. So for instance, the one I'm involved in is a science, technology, engineering and maths one. So sometimes students come in and think they want to do science, and then they find actually that engineering and design was really interesting, and I'll go off and do that instead. So it's a good way of just exploring sort of areas that are related to the ones that you think you might be interested in.
Do you know, though, if I was going to do one, I'd do the arts course, because I think that would be so lush just to do something that I maybe wasn't going to do for my undergraduate degree. So it can be a nice way to actually get a bit of something else in addition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice place to just experiment with those subjects as well, because quite often students come in thinking, I definitely want to do history, for example, and then they meet art history, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but I really love that, and and that's the thing that they got the most out of, so they might slightly change career direction. And particularly with actually our YO32 module, the People, Work and Society, quite often people come in with a very fixed idea of, oh, I want to do law, but then they'll do something in management or something in psychology and think, oh, but actually I really enjoyed that.
Because the whole idea is that it gives a different voice from the disciplines. So you'd learn a little bit of content, a lot of study skills, and just the different ways, I guess, that certain disciplines are, grappling with some of the issues that are central to these modules.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you get a different perspective on things.
But does it matter then? So say well, art.
Yeah.
Does it matter in terms of choosing something like that? Because they can be linked to a qualification, but equally they, you can do a standalone one and then completely change tact and do something else, and they're not going to say, well, you haven't done a STEM one, so you can't come into our, chemistry qualification, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, we have actually got experience of students doing the arts module and then going on to the first science level 1 module, and being very successful at that. So I think just the practice at studying with the OU, finding the time, getting your study skills up to date is great. If you are particularly worried about going into an essay writing discipline and you think you need practice with that, then it might be better to do either YO31 or YO32. But actually all of them will be valuable just for kind of getting your head back into study and getting those skills sorted.
Oh, good. Well, Jonathan loved his access course.
Oh,
he
fabulous.
thoroughly recommends it, so that's good to know.
I didn't hear that, Jonathan. Louder.
So what about students then? So these are a great thing for people to maybe recommend to friends or family if they're already studying. But for some of our students who may be starting to study and maybe watching this on catch-up who aren't here right now, let's just think about that whole sort of period, irrespective of whether it's access or level 1. Some of the sorts of key things that students could do to start getting organised, start getting prepared over the summer. We don't want them to go off and do too much stuff and get burnt up before they even start. But are there some things that sort of set good organisational patterns or good boundary patterns at home? Or, is there anything people could do to sort of, I guess, mentally and maybe a little bit physically prepare themselves if they're starting this October?
Yeah, I mean, I continue studying, so it's the time when I'm doing all that myself. So I kind of have a look at what's coming up over the coming months and try and set myself a little timetable of when do I think I'm going to be doing my study, making sure I don't book too much in. So I don't commit myself to going out every Monday night, for example, or anything like that. And getting your space at home sorted, I think, as well, is really important. I mean, I'm very conscious that for our students, they're studying in their own time and their own space. And quite often that space can be used by other family members. And it's really important that if you can just eke out a little bit of respect for your study space and a little bit of, your own bit of the house where you can study, then that can help enormously.
And people study on their beds, they study on the train, they study everywhere. But I've heard students say that sometimes, putting on a jumper or putting on something can sort of help them get into this physical study space. And one of the things I love at the end of an academic year is cleaning out my files, getting all my paper and new books and stuff, and new highlighters, and just feeling like, there is an organisation. And even though maybe I'm not always as organised as I'd like to be, I often want to pick 1 or 2 things I'm going to try and sort of do a bit better the next year. Any advice, Carlton?
I think it's trying to work out what worked for you in that last year, and you'll know straight away that some things that just did work for you, and equally you'll know some things that didn't work for you. And those are the things probably to try and concentrate on, and just try and adapt your sort of study technique to try and to work on those things. Because it's seen with Access, where we've even had quite experienced students come back to study with us and engage with some of the sort of study tips and skills, and they come across things they've not seen before, and then I'll give that a go. And those kind of students who engage with that kind of thing do really well, because they have their mind open to try different things. So just every time, just try something a bit different for the things that didn't work so well in the past.
Oh. Well, Dave's got to go. Bye-bye, Dave. And Siobhan says that she's really been bigging up the Access, and she hadn't studied for 30 years, and it really, really helped her to decide what she was going to do. So well done. That's lovely to hear. OK, so a lot of this about getting your mental space and getting things ready and up and running for students. Other things that they might want to think about then in terms of maybe, calendars. I know students like calendars, like plotting things. You've mentioned that can be helpful for you, and just thinking about your time in that sort of way. We were also talking about study intensity before, and thinking about the tasks and managing time and being reflective. How can students sort of start to get a handle, I guess, on how they might start recording and reflecting on some of those things when they start to study? Is there anything you do in your study, Anactoria?
Well, I always plot the TMA deadlines into my calendar.
Yeah.
Assessment focused.
Well, but also I always then make sure that I plot a quiet week beforehand. So the weekend before I've got an assignment due in, I'll make sure that I block that out on my calendar. And I'm a tutor as well, so when I'm marking, I do the same sort of thing. If I've got a TMA deadline, I block out the weekend after so that I can mark it. Yeah. So I guess I'm just kind of forward focused in, when are going to be the flashpoints, and trying to be as prepared for those as I can. But if I'm studying, also looking at the pattern of the module, so, is there any stuff that I'm going to need to get in? So I did a science module last year that Carlton teased me about, because
Did very well.
I'm not a natural scientist.
Surprisingly well for an art student.
But I was really rubbish, actually, at getting all the stuff together for the practical experiments in time. So I spent frantic hours in B&Q looking for ungalvanised nails on a Saturday morning, which is ridiculously difficult, actually. So I could have done with much more time to do that. So next year, I'm going to be much more focused on what do I need to have, to hand, a couple of weeks before I actually need it. So
I think for the brand new students, I'm always impressed if someone says to me they've got the sort of study planner in front of them, that's stuck on a wall, and they know what they've got to do. If you're asking sort of students, do you know where the study planner is, and you can hear them scrabbling with bits of paper, that always sort of concerns me slightly. But if someone has got that in front of them, you always think they've got their sort of study under control. They know what they've got to do. I think that's for me, that's really key. So to know what's coming up and how long they've got to study a particular sort of topic or do a particular task.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned in Access that you get a personal tutor and they talk to you on the phone a lot. And at level 1, you might have online tutorials, face-to-face tutorials, and various different things going on. But what is very central and very unique about the OU student journey is that contact with their tutor. And you both teaching as well. How important is it that students sort of get to grips with that relationship with their tutor, and how can they use their tutor most effectively to help them? What sorts of things are not in scope for our new students out there who may not know?
The key thing, if a student is struggling, contact someone, okay, is the bottom line, because the number of times where students think, I'm not quite sure who to contact, so I didn't contact anyone. Bad idea. If you've got a problem, contact someone. So it may be your student support team, but more often than not, go to your tutor in the first instance, because your tutor deals directly with the subject matter in the module that you're studying, deal with most of the things around any assessment that you'll be doing. So, and if they don't know the answer, they will know who to refer you on to. So the key thing is, if anyone's struggling, just get in contact, because the tutor can make a big difference to someone's success.
Yeah. And tell me, what if students start studying and then think, actually, this is a bit more complicated than I'd initially thought, maybe I need to go back a level? Because with open access, it is difficult to sort of gauge where you're at. Is there sort of flexibility there for students?
There's a little bit of flexibility, maybe not as much as ideally we'd like. But I mean, certainly they should chat to their tutor first, because it might well be that actually the things they're worrying about can be helped on the module that they're on. They might just be And we all are slightly over anxious, you know, if we hit at something that we think, I just can't do this, or, you know, I feel that this is insurmountable. But if that's only a tiny bit of the module and the only bit that they're struggling on, you know, it might not mean that they can't do the rest of it. So yeah, definitely talk to your tutor first. I mean, I love it when my students communicate. If they drop me an email and say, oh, I've read this bit of the module and I really enjoyed it, that's fantastic. So, you know, never be scared of contacting your tutor. That's what they're there for.
And of course, students are such a great support. In fact, I'm going to see my friend in France this week, who I met at an OU tutorial about 20 years ago. And we're best of friends ever since. And there's some lovely friendships being made in the chat room as well. So don't forget your OU students are a great support as well. I'd like to just have a quick catch up with HJ to see some of the lovely friendships that are starting to blossom.
Yeah, it's good to just see on the chat people are sort of just finding things that they're mutually bonding over and helping and support each other, which is always fantastic. I think one of the things we do say, though, is that it might not be wise to share certain details. But one thing you can do is if you email us, studenthub@open.ac.uk, you can email us and we're happy to pass on details between each other if you want to, and rather keep some details safe. But one thing I must take up with Davin is saying a bit of a difference is that we have no food on the table at the moment, and whether or not I've stashed it. But the only food that I've got here is Brazil nuts, so I'm quite disappointed actually. But maybe I can find something later. I don't know. There was some talk of cake earlier, but I'm not sure if we've got any at the moment. But yeah, a lot of people saying they find the Access modules really helpful as a springboard to their qualifications. And I think Jane just keeps saying how she's very excited to start her new module as well. And a lot of people are finding it helpful to get all this advice as well. So if you do have any questions, I'm sure all of our lovely guests would love to hear from you as well.
Thank you, HJ. And you're doing a sterling job on the chat as well. I see you've got 2 computers there, which I assume means you're doing double the work. So we'll need to get you some cake or something to keep your sugar levels up.
But that's wise.
That is brilliant. Excellent. So lots of students very excited about their journey. And thank you very much, Anactoria and Carlton, for coming and sharing some advice there for students. I hope that's reassured you at home that, you know, it is all a learning journey. You don't have to be perfect at level 1. And that's why the grades don't count as much at that point. And everything's nice and staggered. So if you are just starting to join the OU, there's plenty of help and support available. Lots of lovely tutors, lots of lovely students to talk to and connect with as you make your way through. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're going to have a short video break now where we're going to take a look at the Legacy Garden. And then we will be back to start looking at year 1 to 2. So that is for students who've done the first year of level 1 and are starting to get a little bit more specialist. And I'm joined by Sue Pawley for that session, and we're also going to take a quick look at maths within that. So again, the whole idea of where things get a little bit more technical that Carlton was talking about before. So stay with us after the short break and we'll be back very soon.